Bulls Gold is delivered to you via the Barroom Network, now in its 7th year of providing podcasts about Chicago sports, movies, and more. Make sure to subscribe to the Barroom Network for free and easy downloads of its programming, and visit its merchandising store at deepdishtees.com to purchase t-shirts, hoodies, and mugs. Now, on with the show.
Hey, welcome to Bulls Gold on the Barroom Network. I'm Salim Sutterwala, and as always, I'm joined by Edward Shirley Jr. Hey, Ed, how's it going today?
Hey, it's going well. Wish we could say the same for our Bulls this week, but with me, everything has been everything. How about you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad personally as far as everything's concerned. I'm doing well. I've been working from home. My company pretty much said that they want everyone that can work from your home to work from home, so to limit people in the office because of rising cases with COVID. But yeah, the Bulls aren't doing too hot right now. They're dealing with a bunch of injuries, and they've had two major ass kickings back to back.
Oh yeah.
So they're not doing too hot overall, and it's a bit frustrating. Hopefully, with the Zach LaVine news as well, hopefully we get good news. I mean, they seem optimistic about it, but like we'll see. I guess to end up seeing how long he ends up missing, because he's not going to play tomorrow or today or on Mondays. It's looking like.
Yeah, this is looking like one of those weeks where when it rains, it pours, and hopefully we get some good news at some point. But yeah, right now it's looking like a little rough stretch.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's a few things we're going to talk about today in general. Obviously, there was that Woj interview or article with Michael Reinsdorf about AK. There is also a lot of, again, conflicting rumors on what the Bulls could do in regards to trades, especially with the trade deadline creeping up here with less than a month left in that regards. There's various different things with lineups, obviously with the injuries that we've talked about. And to help us do that is our friend from NBC Sports Chicago, where he covers the Chicago Bulls, is Rob Schaefer. Rob, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm great, guys. No complaints. It's 23 degrees in Chicago today, so that's actually a step up from what we've had a little bit in recent weeks. But you know, I always love coming on. It's always a pleasure and an honor. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, love having you.
Yeah, 100%. It's always fun having you on, and fun right now, as we said, is not so much as fun watching the Bulls because they're really laboring with it, not only missing their defensive wings. Now that, like we've said, we heard bad news about Zach as far as at least end game, where he had to miss, and then they're saying that he had been playing through knee soreness supposedly, like secretly or whatever. Not, they weren't making it public, but that's obviously going on as well. Yeah, it's just been kind of tough watching them these last couple of weeks, I would say, even defensively at least. I mean, they've been managing to win overall outside of these last two games, but it's really been one of those situations where you really see the value in guys like Caruso, Javante, and then obviously now you also lose after the Nets game, you lost Derek Schoen Jr. for like 2-4 weeks. What has been your thoughts on watching them? Like, even with effort wise, it's been kind of frustrating in that regards too.
Yeah, I think that was the most disappointing part of the Warriors game for sure. And then in some ways, the second half of that Nets game is how, the effort waxed and waned throughout. This is something that Billy echoed in his post-game comments after the Warriors game. DeMar, talked about how uncharacteristic it was for this team to not show as much defensive effort as they have in the past. And like you said, Salim, this has been trending for a couple weeks. Billy's been talking about it. The Bulls, since the start of that 9-game winning streak, that season-long 9-game win streak, are 23rd in defense in the NBA. And, for the first quarter of the season, when they got off to the hot start they got off to, the defensive intensity, the defensive play style, the defensive identity and the aggression that they were playing with and the way it was sparking their fast break, like that was one of the more pleasantly surprising storylines of this Bulls season. It's obviously taken a little bit of a hit of late. I think you could argue some of that is kind of regression to the mean a little bit, but also, you can't overstate the loss of Alex Caruso especially, and then Javonte starting at the 4, bringing the kind of chaotic energy that he was bringing, and Derek Jones Jr., his length and activity as well. Those all hurt. I don't think they single-handedly make up, a 42-point deficit or, whatever it was in the second half against the Nets, 30 to 35 points. But I do think when and if you start getting those guys back, the defensive just energy level, compete level will hopefully improve because, not only are those guys kind of heart and soul of the team guys in terms of the, just frenetic vibe they bring on the court, Caruso especially is also a big presence in terms of his defensive communication. And, a lot of the breakdowns that you saw against the Warriors, especially, I think you would hope that, better communication, better organization could remedy some of that. But yeah, it's been the defense. It's been that kind of I hate to use a cliche, but just grit level that this team had at the beginning of the season. It just doesn't seem to be there. It's kind of the dog days of the season. So in some ways that's understandable. You have the Warriors loss where Zach goes out in the first 3 minutes of the game. That's a traumatic thing. But for the ceiling, this team is flashing for 2 just kind of marquee games. Nets, Warriors, obviously they were nationally televised. Those are contending teams. Not as if the Warriors were whole either without Clay and Draymond. So, it kind of rings hollow when you talk about, the Bulls were shorthanded. Well, maybe, if you stack them up against each other, maybe it's even, or maybe the Bulls were, a little bit more disadvantaged because Zach goes out mid-game. That kind of screws with their rotations. But, I just don't think, given where this team wants to go and given, the ceiling that they've flashed, that those are acceptable results. So, who knows how long Zach's going to be out. We haven't gotten the update on his MRI as of yet. Caruso is still kind of stuck in protocol limbo. Definitely going to miss at least the next 2 games. He's not traveling with the team right now on the trip to Boston and Memphis. But, the work's cut out for them because you're at Boston tonight. That's a team that's been inconsistent, but on any given night, they have the talent to be dangerous. At Memphis, hottest team in the NBA. Cleveland, Milwaukee on the docket next week. Cleveland's obviously already beaten the brakes off the Bulls this season. In Cleveland, Milwaukee, a team they haven't seen yet, but even when the Bulls are fully healthy, I think their size and obviously Giannis presents a lot of matchup problems. So, there's a good and bad aspect to that. There's ample opportunity to right the ship. There's also ample opportunity for this minor downturn to become less and less minor by the day. It's easy to say, it's only 1 game, it's only 2 games, but similar to how these last 2 games have gone, if that downturn snowballs into an avalanche, it could wind up with a recalibration of expectations, or just, generally the bad vibes continuing. But the one thing's for sure, whether they lose or win, the defensive competitive level, just the effort level, has to be better than it was against the Warriors, because I think the Bulls fan base, the United Center, has welcomed this team with open arms. This season has been so warm. Obviously, the MVP chance for DeMar every time he's at the free throw line. Zach's gotten a couple too. Some of the atmospheres at the UC this year have been just electric. The city is buzzing about this team, and they were getting booed walking off after the first half last night of the Warriors game, being down 31. And big deficits can be a factor in why you get booed, but I don't think they're always the whole reason. And I think it was the crowd kind of picking up on that lack of energy that led to that. So that was something I didn't think I was going to see at the United Center this year. I even joked that, just given the hodgepodge of guys on the floor, it almost felt like one of those, rebuilding year blowout games. And that's something that I thought personally that this team was past. Obviously they've hit a little bit of an adversity, a little bit of a rough stretch here, and they've just got to find a way to dig themselves out of it.
So what does all of this do for perception right now? Because if someone is just like a casual NBA fan where they only watch the games that are on ESPN and TNT, then this was their first glimpse of really seeing this Bulls team, and they see them get thrashed by the Nets and Warriors, even though they did beat the Nets earlier, twice in the season without Kyrie. But like, what does this do for perception, and what does this do for any thoughts of contending? There's so many mixed things that you have to consider when you consider the health of what's going to happen with Zach LaVine. Still missing Caruso, still missing Javonte Green. Derrick Jones Jr. is going to be out for a little bit. So there's so many missing pieces on this team right now, as we a game away from the halfway point. And the Bulls still sit first in the Eastern Conference. But is this potentially a week that you could see looking back on where it's that's kind of where things trailed off a little bit? Or is this something that the team can actually bounce back from?
Yeah, I think it's possible that we look back on this as a negative turning point in the season. It's probably, I wouldn't want to go there yet, especially because, like you said, Edward, the perspective is that they're still first in the East. In terms of perception, though, obviously this has a huge negative impact on that. Like you said, casual observers, national pundits. Like I was on my phone this morning looking at the ESPN app. You've got Stephen A. and Wilbon, just kind of railing on the Bulls, and a lot of things we were talking about, like the effort and intensity level, which is obviously unacceptable stuff. Talking about how they're not a true contender. There's levels to contention. And I actually think, I certainly would have said this. I think most Bulls fans would have conceded even before this week that in terms of actual championship equity, the Nets and Bucks have still kind of been on a tier of their own when they're both healthy. And then kind of the Bulls, Heat are kind of in that 1B to 2 tier. So I'm trying not to let, two pretty demoralizing losses, as demoralizing as they are, move me off of that, because this team has looked, that they have almost a half season's worth of a body of work before these two games, especially when they're healthy. That shows that they're better than the team that they were the last two games. But perception wise, it's damaging. That's for sure. The positive spin I would put on that, if I can put a positive spin on it, and this is something Zach alluded to after the Nets game, is this is a team that was at their best this season when they had that kind of, oh my God, I'm overloading the cliches like crazy today, but they had this kind of nobody believes in us, chip on the shoulder mentality where they were out to prove people wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And, I'm not saying that totally flipped, because they're obviously still, doubters of the Bulls or whatever. There certainly are more now after these last two games. And Zach even alluded to this, and I don't think he meant it in a bad way, but just that after the Nets game specifically, we have and had been playing with a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. Now maybe this is a chance to kind of get that back. Now, the rebuttal to that is, well, then what happened the next game? You had a 26-point loss to Brooklyn. You come out on your home floor against the Warriors, give up 138 points again, and get beat by the largest margin of the season. So they haven't inspired a tremendous amount of confidence that chip on the shoulder thing is going to work out so far. But maybe eventually that is the case for how this stretch can kind of turn itself around. We'll see if they're able to do that. But from a personnel perspective, these defensive issues, to me, just from what you see on the floor right now, I just kind of don't know how they get fixed until you get Caruso and Javonte back. The Bulls obviously can't afford to think that way. But just as an observer, it's been on this steady downturn for so long, and it's obviously fallen off a cliff without Caruso, Javonte, and Derrick Jones Jr. in there, that I think that is going to be more of an uphill battle. But, I think that's the case for how it gets turned around. They kind of refocus, reset, and commit back to that kind of prove it mindset, because I think it'd be fair to say that singular focus on, having that chip on the shoulder slipped in these last two games.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to see what Billy will do here with these rotations. And I know originally it's thinking, okay, well, how are we going to supplement the starting forward position, because you're missing not only your starter, but that you're missing your backup to your backup. You're down to your essentially fourth string power forward situation in that sense. But now obviously with Zach out these next two games, these rotations are going to get really wonky. You're going to be playing a lot more Matt Thomas off the bench, unfortunately. And I'm guessing maybe Ayo ends up in the starting lineup. Maybe you commit to completely guard-oriented lineup with Vooch, outside of Vooch, obviously starting at center. What do you see as far as what you think Billy's going to do? I mean, I guess I don't know if there's not much, if there is much he can do, other than the stuff that I just mentioned. But like, do you see anything else that he could try?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of Troy Brown Jr., a lot of Alfonso McKinney on the wing, and then like you said, I mean, I think I would predict, and I always get these starting lineup predictions wrong. I think I'm becoming famous for for missing on those, especially in a podcast format. But I would guess Coby. I would guess Coby first, and then maybe Io slides into the starting lineup just because they've, at most turns with a backcourt spot open, they've gone to Coby there. But either way, I mean, yeah, it's Billy likes to go 8 or 9 deep, but they don't have an 8 or 9 deep right now that is particularly competitive compared to what they had at the beginning of the season. I mean, add insult to injury, no pun intended there, Lonzo being questionable with knee soreness is like, and just for the amount of minutes that he's played this season, even with the COVID absence, like that adds to it too. So I don't I don't know how Billy solves this problem. Just given how candid he is, I think he would admit, and we're going to talk to him pregame before the Celtics game, I think he would even admit that he's kind of flying by the seat of his pants too at this point, because this season has had so much tumult in that respect. But, you're just going to have to, I think what you could do as a fan is just kind of pray that you get, a couple good Troy Brown Jr. games here and there. Alfonso McKinney, who hustles, that's for sure, but gets hot, maybe shooting the ball because that's, can maybe juice them a little bit. But, I mean, it's no secret. I mean, the half-court offense has been, an inconsistency all season. And when they're not defending at the level that they were early in the year and they can't get out in transition, it's just been, I don't want to say it's been an offense struggle, but it's been a struggle at both ends. Like those two things affect each other. And clearly the defensive struggles have been bleeding into the offense lately. And they just need to get right game. I mean, I think this Boston matchup is an opportunity. Like Boston isn't a bad team by any means, but the Bulls did to them in Boston earlier this season what the Bulls just had done to them against the Warriors and Nets. So maybe if they can cleanse the palate there, they could get themselves back on the right track here. But I will say, as isolation heavy as Boston is and as much criticism as they get, matching up with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum tonight without Caruso, without Javante, without Derrick Jones Jr., I mean, that's up there with kind of the toughest wing defensive matchups in the league, and the Bulls won't be fully staffed for it. So it'll be a challenge. Like I said, I'm sure Billy would even admit that it's going to be a guessing game. It's going to be a trial and error without much margin for error. But we'll see how they're able to handle it. They have a track record this season, the Bulls, of responding to adversity. They have, through the first 30 to 35 some odd games. They haven't the last couple, and they're going to have to, lean on that and see if they can, grit their teeth and get through the stretch here.
All right, so I need you to solve something, and then I need you to project what's going to happen going forward. So I think if you follow Bulls Twitter, Vucevic is probably the most polarizing player on the team. And he's had flashes like recently, like the last month or so, where we've gotten more decent games out of him. But I think a lot of fans see him and they feel like he's not playing at the with the urgency or the level that they would want from a guy like Vucevic, who's been an all-star and can play really good basketball. So if Zach LaVine is going to miss however many games, I think a lot of people are going to look at him as someone who's going to have to step up. What do you think that he can do that? And what do you think has been ultimately his his problem this season in terms of really putting together some long, consistent stretches of good play?
Yeah, I really don't. I really can't say that I have one clear answer. I mean, it's the way it's been explained by, obviously Vooch and Billy and people within the team, especially at the beginning of the season when he was in that kind of all-time awful shooting slump, is this role adjustment where he's posting up less, usage is lower, offense isn't being run through him, and he's just being put in situations that he's been in his career, but just not at the volume that he is now. So, maybe that's a factor. I mean, there also could just be the factor of being inconsistent. I mean, Vooch was pretty consistent when he came over at the trade deadline last season. I don't really know what his track record was in Orlando on a night in, night out basis. You catch him a couple nights a year. being kind of a, local regional, NBA reporter or whatever.
Yeah.
But there might just be an inconsistent quality, especially with kind of the shooting variance with him. That's possible. I actually think when you look at the season in sum, he's had, from what I can glean, one of, if not his best defensive season. But obviously, like games like the Warriors game, games like the Nets game, he's kind of, he's not going to create advantages for you on that end. Like at his best, he could just stay solid positionally and, not give up cracks. And then you kind of rely on your, point of attack guys who, again, the Bulls don't really have right now, to wreak havoc. So I don't really know what it is. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe, with a guy like if Zach is out for any extended period of time and it's Vooch and DeMar, those are the featured two pieces. Maybe things slow down a little bit offensively and he's able to, get in a few more post touches, get rolling a little bit with stuff going through them. Maybe they're staggering these kind of bench units of guys that are not, thought of as scorers, but can be defensive energy guys, your Troy Brown Juniors or Ios. Maybe he can kind of, have a more ball dominant role and get himself rolling a little bit. I mean, that's kind of the closest thing I can say, but it's, there's no escaping scoring wise. He's been inconsistent this season and it has kind of shown up at times when the Bulls needed him to step up the most. I mean, right before the Bulls had their little COVID pause and then launch into this 9-game win streak where Vooch, really seemed like he turned a corner in terms of playing better. Those games against Cleveland and Miami, those blowout losses on the road back in December, those were kind of like, to me, the low point of his season. And those were two games where the Bulls were severely shorthanded and needed him to step up. And that frustrates nobody more than Vooch, who's, whatever criticism you may have on him, you can't say he's a selfish player or not a team guy. Like that's every frustration that he has is with himself for not helping the team. So that's the one thing that you can't say about him. So I don't know what the answer is. It's just but you're absolutely right that the Bulls need more consistency from him, especially if Zach is out. It's a big opportunity for him to step up. And I think, the one thing that I would, lean on if I was trying to be an optimist about Vooch is that maybe, with a little bit more in the touches department in terms of offense being run through him, maybe that's the way that he finds his rhythm over an extended stretch and is able to get rolling. Other than that, though, defensively, I don't know that it's getting easier for him again until they get the full complement of their point of attack guys back, because so much of the Bulls' defensive success early in the season was predicated on that. And you see when, and this is no shot at anybody, but just when, the Alex Carusos of the world are replaced by guys further down the depth chart, it just doesn't look the same. So yeah, big stretch for Vooch. I mean, the guy's not a 2-time All-Star for nothing. So it's not like, it's not like he's never been through ups and downs in his career before and hasn't come out of them and hasn't, developed and been resilient. But given that he's in this level of a winning situation for the first time in his career, I don't think it's an understatement to say that this season is one of the most important, if not the most important of his career. And this stretch coming up for the Bulls right now, to me, just in terms of salvaging and kind of staying on the right track, is about as important of a stretch as they've faced so far this year.
Yeah, and I think it's to a point where I think they need to focus on going to him a lot more in this stretch too. Just kind of feed him the ball and slow the game down even more. I know they have, technically by traditional pace standards, they're not a fast team, but they do run a lot when they get on the break, especially off of steals and things like that. What I would like them to do is just slow the game down right now, because you don't have the bodies to really do what you want to do normally, and get Vooch the ball and like force feed him in the post, like kind of go back to his Orlando days essentially, that I have as far as really getting him going and getting, making sure that he stays involved all game. Because like yesterday, he started out rough, and it was frustrating seeing him like get out hustled by Kevon Looney. And obviously Kevon Looney is a solid rotation player, but it's like it kind of had flashbacks of the Deadmon game against the Heat. It's like, man, these guys are backups, dude. You shouldn't be getting like out hustled, and you shouldn't be getting bodied by these guys. Like you should be out there dropping 30 points for them.
And Celine, to your point there, like to me, the most enduring image from the Warriors game last night was that inbounds pass that Vooch had with about 30 seconds left in the first half, when he just kind of, lackadaisically rolled it in, and it gets stolen. I think it was by Otto Porter Jr. and then shoveled to Curry for a three. And, the Bulls are looking at maybe I can't remember exactly how much time was left. So I don't know if there was a 2-for-1 situation, or at least they were going to be able to run the clock out and try to get something. I mean, the game might have already been out of reach at that point, but get something before the half. And for that play, to me, it was just so emblematic of the looseness that the Bulls played with offensively, and the just, like I said, haphazard, lackadaisical nature they played with just generally. And that was him. And he does have little sequences like that. And you could see, I mean, we were sitting right there on that baseline, the media seats were, and you could see him like kicking himself for that mistake. But that kind of slippage to me was just emblematic of where the team has been the last few games. And with Zach out, that's your second best player. That's a guy who's supposed to be carrying that all-star standard.
Sorry, I was saying that's the thing. Like, yeah, everyone wasn't playing up to par, but like he's one of the top guys, so he needs to lead by example. That's the thing that what it comes down to, and situations like that. And I've defended Vooch a lot this year. Like a lot of times people, crap on him about the defensive breakdowns. A lot of times it's not his fault because of the point of attack defense and the connectivity as far as people hitting on their rotations is not on Vooch. He's doing usually what he needs to do on in the drop coverage, that is, and hitting his marks. Like you mentioned earlier, his defense has been pretty solid this year within the scheme. But yeah, like stuff like that, it's just like, man, come on, we need you to really enforce your will. And we really need you to like lead this team, because now you're going to be without Zach. You're going to be without all these other players that tend to enforce their will on the game. So we need you to be that guy now.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing you do, so I think I kind of agree with you, Salim, about the slowing down the game aspect of it. Maybe I know like the Bulls don't want to become the most post-up dominant team in the league like they were in the second half of last season, but getting them a few more touches there, that's a way that you can enforce your will and impose yourself on a game, right?
Right.
And the other thing you do there, and you do it when he's in pick and roll because he's such a good short roll playmaker. You also get his passing involved a little bit because there were a couple possessions early in the Warriors game when the outcome of the game wasn't decided, where he got the ball in the post, drew two, and then talking about what the Bulls still do have. You still do have Lonzo Ball. You still do have Coby White, like prolific catch and shoot 3-point shooters that, as poorly as Lonzo played from a ball security perspective last night, was shooting the ball pretty well. Like if you can get his passing involved out of the post too, Vooch usually makes the right reads there. If you're trying to get him going by getting him going by extension, getting the team rolling a little bit, maybe that is the answer. DeMar obviously is somebody who can thrive in a slower paced game. Just cut down the number of possessions, because the Bulls aren't generating turnovers the way that they were at the beginning of the season right now without their point of attack guys. It's not
right.
When the game is chaotic, that was something that was benefiting them earlier in the season. Now it seems like when there's chaos, they're coming out on the wrong end of it. Just loose balls. I mean, how many 50-50 balls did they get beaten to last night, even in the Brooklyn game? So you're right. There has to be some kind of tone switch there.
Yeah, and that's what I mean too. That not necessarily just give him the ball and have him back on the defender. It's more so just give him the ball, and then he can find cutters and things like that too, because he's a good passer. He has good vision as a big man. So it's not, like I say, it's not just about getting him the ball and just, hey, back up whatever center is guarding you. That's not the only thing that you can do with him.
100%.
So let me throw this in there. Depending on, like, we've been talking about the trade deadline, which is 4 weeks away, and God forbid if Zach is out for a pretty significant amount of time. But do you think that there is a world where, if he is, that it could influence the Bulls in terms of what their mindset going into the trade deadline? Because I think right now, there's been a lot of talk about if Patrick Williams is going to be available, if Coby White is available. I think like there was an article that was speculating that Coby White would be available for the right price, but that Patrick Williams is not someone that they're looking to move. But what do you think happens if, Zach is out, let's say, like 4 weeks, 3 weeks, I don't know, something like that? Would that be something big enough to alter their mindset heading into the trade deadline?
I think something, and it's obviously kind of too early to speak totally firmly on it. So I'm, put the speculative tag on all this, but I think a week to week thing like that, I don't know if that influences the big picture thinking for this season. Cause you're getting him back at some point. Obviously, God forbid, and it doesn't look like it's trending in that direction, but something season ending that changes probably the calculus a little bit more. But no, I think, and I know the Bulls they like Coby White, the front office, and obviously Billy really likes Coby, and Casey Johnson reported yesterday that the Bulls are not intent on moving Coby by any means. But I think anybody, nobody on this team is necessarily untouchable outside of the core guys, and this front office has been so bold and aggressive at every turn this season, since they got here. That was before they were the top seed in the East. I don't know. I'm really curious to see what happens at this trade deadline, because I'm not sure that I really know what to expect. Like you said, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. But on the Zach question, I think 2 to 4 weeks, like that type of timeline, I don't know if that can affect your thinking that much, because at that point you're coming back, maybe after the All-Star break, and you've still got enough ramp up time to get, for the postseason. The Bulls. Here's another positive spin. Because I know there might be a market for that right now. Some optimism after the last 2 games. This is why it was so valuable, regardless of what the level of competition was, for the Bulls to bank all these wins early in the season. Like, they do have a little bit of a cushion here in terms of still hanging around in that top of the Eastern Conference playoff picture, even if they're not after this stretch of games. I think it's certainly feasible that they could drop out of the 1 seed, but they still are going to be in that top 4 conversation, I would think, throughout the end of the season. Obviously, Zach's health, TBD there, that could affect things. But to tie up on that, I think a week to week thing can't affect your long term thinking too much. Season ending would, but no, I think this. I think they're going to look to improve any way they can. I don't think they're eager to move guys like Patrick Williams or Coby White by any means, but if they've proven anything, this new front office over the last 2 years that they've been here, essentially, it's that, anything is conceivable, for the right price.
Yeah. That's funny. Like, we've talked about trades, like, pretty much, like, I feel like the last month on this show, what the Bulls could do, especially with the Patrick Williams situation. And hearing the things that AK has said, as far as him talking about team chemistry, taking that into consideration when making a big move. And then we've heard these conflicting reports, where one report says that the Bulls will not make Patrick Williams available, but they're open to trading Coby White. And then the next day, another KC drops the tidbit, said, no, they love Coby White. They think he's a high IQ player, and they're not going to trade, or they'll open to trading Patrick Williams. So again, we're back at the whole, chess match or the equation, I should say, that is AK. Like, what is he going to do? What do you see as far as, do you think, would you be surprised? Like you said, you said that, you can't, anything is possible, but with him, but would you be surprised if you traded Patrick Williams here and really tried to go after a Jeremy Grant, or a Harrison Barnes, or who knows? You'll probably go after another player that we haven't really talked about.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't surprise me. Again, like, if asked to predict, I would have to ride the fence, just because this front office, like, you think you have them figured out, and then they go, completely, in another direction. But no, it wouldn't surprise me at all. It would be significant, that's for sure, because Patrick Williams was the first personnel move that they made, forget draft pick, and he is a top 4 pick. And, obviously he is someone that flashed a pretty high ceiling, and that, if he's not traded, is a building block for the future. Like, he's enormously important as that kind of bridge piece when and if DeMar and Vooch age out, to have that, just speaking of the vision here, Zach, Lonzo, and Patrick Williams is kind of your 3 kind of future building blocks. But no, it wouldn't surprise me, especially in a Jeremy Grant deal, just because Grant is, I think, the hottest commodity on the trade market right now. I think not a perfect fit. I mean, who is? but a pretty good fit for what the Bulls need. There are some ties there. Obviously he shared some time with AK in Denver. Billy coached him in OKC. If they are going to actively pursue him, they have a good idea for who he is as a person and player. And, I think with the trade stuff, the Bulls are a little bit limited from an asset perspective, but so are a lot of the contenders just to have mortgaged their future draft capital. And when you look at it specifically for the Detroit deal, I think Patrick Williams is, it got to be a pretty desirable return for a team like Detroit, who obviously coveted him in the 2020 draft and are just kind of are in asset accumulation mode. And I don't really know who the young player is that is more intriguing from a ceiling perspective than Patrick Williams, who's on the table in a Jeremy Grant trade. That's just my personal opinion. Because you look around like at the suitors, the Lakers are reported to be in, right? That's kind of a Talen Horton-Tucker centered package. I probably prefer Patrick Williams as a prospect to him. Like you go down the line. So it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. I don't know if I would predict it. But I certainly would bet that the Bulls are exploring and thinking about that very seriously, because I don't know what your guys' thought on this is, but when I think about, and I don't want to put a ceiling on Patrick Williams. He's 20 years old and has such a versatile skill set and plays such a premium position. But when I think of kind of high percentile outcomes for him, I think Jeremy Grant is one of the higher percentile outcomes for that a guy like Patrick Williams could have. And this is just my personal opinion. When I look at, grabbing a window that maybe people's opinions have changed because of the two blowouts, that's understandable. But, when you have a window, those things aren't promised. And for me, it's kind of like, I see the logic. I see the logic either way, but I definitely see the logic of, going after a guy in Jeremy Grant that is, an 80, 90th percentile outcome for Patrick Williams, and just having that guy now that you could slide into the 4. So there's certainly an argument for that. There's an argument for hanging on to him, especially if the Zach thing is a prolonged absence. But all of that is a long-winded ride the fence way of saying we'll see. And I'm excited to see, because I would not have predicted a splash the level that they made last deadline with the Vucevic trade, and that kind of came out of nowhere. So as a fan, as kind of frustrating as it is, because I know people are dying for rumors and tidbits and nuggets anywhere they can get them. As a fan, the big picture, I kind of would want my front office to operate like this in a way that has, not only like media types guessing, but also opposing front offices. Because if conflicting information is getting out, that means that conflicting sources are conflicted on different things. So the big picture as a fan is that's kind of how I would want my front office to be operating.
I guess it comes down to, because Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Grant aren't sexy names. So I guess when you bring that, like when people bring that up as like trade possibilities, like they're players who you definitely think can improve the team. But with Patrick Williams, who, like, again, 20 years old, high upside, and it's just that mystery of it, getting someone like Barnes or Grant to many doesn't come across as worth it. But I agree with you that I think there's a very, in a best case and realistic scenario, I think Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Grant are decent outcomes for Patrick Williams, right? Like, Harrison Barnes is a long-term, like, he's been in the NBA for what, like 8 years now, and he's probably gonna have like a 16, 17-year career, and he's been on some good teams, and he's a guy that can add value offensively. Defense has kind of been up and down throughout his career, but he doesn't really kill you on that end. Jeremy Grant, kind of similar thing, but I think those are acceptable outcomes. And if you apply it to a team now, like when I think of the LaVine injury, and again, we don't know how long he's going to be out, but it really continues to make things click for me that you don't know how long, you don't know if this is, you don't know if there's going to be more chances comparable to this season going forward to really win. And because injuries happen, other teams get better, players, regress, there's a bunch of variables that happen. And this team has been hot this season. So if you can get a guy now who can continue that and keep that iron hot, like, I completely get it. So
yeah. And Grant, for what it's worth, is 27. I mean, it's not like he's a rental, and he's under contract through next season. He kind of fits the timeline. That's when Vooch comes off the books. Like there's a case that could be not a purely short-term move also.
Yeah. So how do you let's say they do get a Harrison Barnes or a Jeremy Grant. Let's just say they get a decent 3-4 who definitely fills that role that, we have a hole at in the starting lineup or wherever. How much better do you think that makes the Bulls going forward? Do you think, I don't think they're going to be favorites to beat Milwaukee in a series, but do you think that evens them with Brooklyn or maybe leapfrogs them against Miami? Where do you think that puts them at in a playoff series against the best in the Eastern Conference?
I still, even as they've beaten Brooklyn twice this season, and we got to see how they stack up against Milwaukee, I still just trust the kind of proven experience nature of those two teams in terms of their own level of contention. So I don't think in a purely on paper assessment, I could put them over Brooklyn or Milwaukee, even with a move like that. But it certainly equips you better to match up. And again, there's no surefire matchup for Kevin Durant. There's no surefire matchup for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Those guys are not getting stopped or even contained or slowed down necessarily by one person. I mean, look at the Bucks Nets series from last year where PJ Tucker was kind of lauded for the job that he did on Kevin Durant, and he was getting 40, 50 points dropped on him. He was making life difficult for him. That's kind of all you could do against the great players at a certain point. But I think with a guy like Jeremy Grant, especially just because of his defensive upside, I think it certainly puts you in a better position for those matchups than, God bless Javonte Green, who's done a great job this season with the role that he's been in. But just from a size perspective, from, just all those different things, I don't know how confident you could feel going into a playoff series against the Nets or Bucks with your primary, wing stopper types against Giannis and KD being Javonte, Derek Jones Jr. whenever he gets back. Lump Caruso in there too. But again, as much as Caruso's a big guard, I mean, KD could just play over the top of him. Giannis, is a freight train. So again, this is why I say the Grant fit isn't perfect. He's not a stopper in relation to those guys by any means, but I think he puts you in a better position. He's better than any of the options the Bulls have in-house. And if he's amenable to kind of sliding back to a similar offensive role to what he had in Denver and OKC, I think he fits pretty well offensively too. The one question I would have is from a rebounding perspective. I'm not sure that he helps the Bulls more than the options that they have in-house in that respect. But that's kind of secondary to kind of the upside that he brings. So I don't know if I could confidently put them over the top of those two kind of preeminent contenders, Brooklyn and Milwaukee. But I'd feel a lot more confident about the way they match up with them going into a playoff series. I think it puts you closer to that position where obviously the Bulls are in the game right now, but you're really in the game in the sense that you're one of those teams that's a break or two away, right? And those breaks come every postseason. It's just a matter of who they break in favor of. So to me, it raises their ceiling. I can't put them over the top. I don't know that I would pick them in a series against Brooklyn and Milwaukee before seeing them match up with the new squads on paper. But it certainly would put them in a better position, in my opinion.
I think Salim, I'm hearing you say that, and what Salim said on last week's show when he said that the best strategy really is to create a team that gives you a chance against the generational talents that are left on the team outside of Giannis and KD, because they're going to get there. So if you can put together a team that can stop everyone else on that team, maybe that gives you the best chance. I kind of like how he put that on the show last week.
That is interesting. That is interesting. And I just from a personnel perspective, when whole, having Grant, Lonzo, Caruso, mean, it just, especially against, and by the way, we're talking about Durant because he's obviously, the main matchup issue that you have to worry about. You also got to worry about James Harden and who knows what's up with Kyrie, but probably Kyrie too. Kyrie didn't even play well, particularly well by his standards in the Nets game at the United Center. But I would imagine he's only going to get better the more games that he gets under his belt. So, just think about that going to a playoff series against Brooklyn, for example. Grant, again, he's not going to stop KD by himself. It's got to be a team thing, but there's your KD matchup. Divide up Lonzo and Caruso between Kyrie and Harden, however you see those two breaking out. To me, I just feel better about that than, what the Bulls have in-house right now. That doesn't mean I don't see the case for, hanging on to Patrick, because I, like anybody who follows me has read my stuff, has listened to, our podcasts over at NBC, like knows I'm high on Patrick Williams. Like he definitely, I think, is going to be a good NBA player and has high two-way potential. It's just about with this group right now, if you believe in this group, what is this window in terms of, is it just this season? Is it a year to 2 years? Because as high of a level as DeMar is playing at right now, as high level as Vooch can maybe get to, we still got to see that on a consistent basis. Those guys are only under contract for DeMar 2 more years and then Vucevic next season. And both are kind of getting up into, towards the tail end of their primes a little bit, just age wise, not, DeMar obviously is playing like he's still in the thick of his prime. But just from an age perspective, do you want to go all in on this 1 to 2 year window, or do you want to, push it off into the future where maybe there's a higher ceiling long term, but also nothing is promised? It's a fascinating question. I have ways that I'm leaning, but I still, I can't say confidently which is the right answer because there's so much uncertainty either direction.
Staying on the Patrick Williams topic, watching him as far as like seeing stills of him and pictures of him and pregame shoot, like he's taking shooting practice and things like that. There was the report that he's no longer obviously wearing the cast. We already saw that he wasn't wearing the cast, but that he has that removable brace where he can take the brace off, on and off. I thought that maybe we may be seeing a quicker timeline. I know the Bulls are still being overly cautious and not really committing to him returning this season. But I was thinking like he could probably be back after the All-Star break. Like, would that surprise you if that happened?
Not necessarily. I think it's too early to know exactly, but the window when he first had the surgery was just after the All-Star break to like mid-April, which would be right on the start of the playoffs. I imagine if and when he comes back, the Bulls are going to want to give him more runway than, right at the doorstep of the playoffs, because the entire conversation we just had about Jeremy Grant, it applies to Patrick Williams too. Like if Patrick Williams comes back, I feel better about the way, even if you can't rely, even if we shouldn't expect too much from him coming off of this traumatic injury, being in year 2, being 20 years old, missing out on, most of a season of development, I still feel better about the way the Bulls match up against the best in the East if he's in there just because of his size and the skill set that he has, especially if he has a little bit of a ramp up. No, just after the All-Star break wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but it's too early, I think, just because they haven't updated the timeline yet. It's too early for me to say definitively when I would see him coming back. I mean, I guess if I had to guess, I would probably just go down the middle of that 4 to 6 month and say sometime in March. That's probably what the best educated guess I could make is. But given how serious the implications seemed on that injury at the time, I think you have to be pretty happy with his progress to be out of the cast. He's starting to get do some strength work with that left wrist and forearm, some range of motion stuff. Billy gave us an update pregame last night and said that he's kind of maybe moving towards soon doing some ball handling stuff and some catch and shoot stuff, but he still has to get that strength and range of motion up in that wrist before he's able to do that. So I think given that the initial report, I think it was from Woj, was that it was expected to be season ending. I think he's in a pretty good spot right now. If you're the Bulls, though, I don't know, and maybe I'd be curious your guys' opinion of this. I just don't know if you can operate under the assumption that you're going to be getting, the maximum production that we were expecting for Patrick Williams coming into this season when he's coming off of this injury and is going to need, an acclimation period. So yeah, it's tough to say, but certainly because of the timeline that the team put out initially and how much progress he's made so far, I'm, expecting him to be back this season. It's just a matter of when. And the safest guess I can make is that it's probably in the middle of that late February to late April timeline. That's the best guess I could put on it, but that's purely speculative, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's just I don't know if you can count on Pat at all this season. I wouldn't want to put that pressure on him, being like, oh, you're going to be the guy that just goes out there and defends Giannis and KD. You're just going to be that guy that does it. Like that's too much of coming off of an injury like this and long layoff, not having, again, he missed a training camp. Again, he's missed so much time to work on his game, to play to improve on the court, and then saying, okay, well, now you have a month to get ready for the playoffs, so now you're gonna have to go defend KD, Giannis, and even at times match up with other bigs and fours in the East that they're not easy to match up against. So yeah, I would like to, again, it's weird. I would like for the Bulls to really add somebody at the four, even if it's not involving a trade involving Pat, but maybe we've talked about guys like PJ Washington. I think you would probably have to involve Coby to get PJ Washington, and then maybe even the Portland pick. But if you can add a player like him too, I think that makes a big difference. And then Pat can come in off the bench and just kind of contribute in whatever aspect and capacity that he can. But yeah, I don't like. I mean, as much as I wanted him to just come in and be like, "Yo, I'm going to be that star that you guys thought I was going to be." I just don't think it makes sense to depend on him to be the savior at the four.
Definitely, especially given what he's gone through this season. I'd be curious about the PJ. I saw the PJ Washington stuff. Is he a legitimate like Bulls target? Is my question, because I get the sense that he's something that the Hornets would look to move to upgrade the center spot.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think it would. If it is a Bulls target, it would have to be a three-way trade where the Hornets get someone like a Miles Turner, for example. I know somebody. I can't remember. I think Will Gottlieb had proposed a fake trade, and it was essentially Bulls sending out Coby and the first to, like, I think Indiana maybe or something like that. And then Indiana sending Turner to the Hornets, and then the Bulls getting like Torrey Craig and PJ Washington or something like that. Some variation of that type of trade where, like, obviously where, a team like Indiana that's looking to rebuild gets a future asset and a young player. But yeah, a straight swap with the Bulls probably doesn't make sense because the Hornets aren't looking to just trade PJ for an asset. They're looking to upgrade certain aspects of their team.
Yeah, the buyout market will be interesting for me to watch, especially if the Bulls can stay in this, upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. If they could be an attractive destination for those types of guys, that can be a way to make an upgrade, but also not, go too crazy in the mortgaging the future / like giving away assets department. But remains to be seen who comes available in that respect.
Yeah, that's why I haven't really been too concerned about like a backup, like improving like backup center or something like that, because usually those type of guys are usually available when during buyout season. But PJ Washington would definitely be an interesting target. I mean, he's still really young too, though, at 23. So I would imagine that if the Hornets do look to move him, like they could definitely get a bunch back. So like Salim said, a 3-team deal would make a lot of sense for them or for us mostly to try and get involved in that. But I mean, that would be a deal where you definitely feel like, okay, yeah, like we upgraded and maybe I guess it depends on what we're giving up in that. Like Coby and a pick, I don't know. I mean, hey, it's tough. Like right now, they're trying to really improve this team without taking away what's been working. So it's kind of a task you don't really envy, but I mean, hey, that's why they get paid the big bucks.
Yeah. The chemistry. Yeah, the chemistry thing is really interesting. How much that's been emphasized, and it really has when they've been winning. It has been, to me, integral to the success. Just having fun, being around each other, having fun playing. That stuff, is certainly a factor in how much synergy teams have.
Yeah, 100%. So we'll wrap up on this. I know outside of the last two games, vibes in general have been really high on the Bulls. And we're seeing national guys writing fluff pieces about the Chicago Bulls. That's how high vibes are right now. Recently, Adrian Wojnarowski, Woj, known obviously as Woj, wrote an article on interviewing Michael Reinsdorf on AK. Have you had the opportunity to read that article, and what are your thoughts as far as just reading that and seeing these things being talked about on a national stage about AK and the Bulls in general?
Yeah, definitely read it. I mean, first, I think those are Michael Reinsdorf's first public comments since the intro press conference when he hired AK. So certainly significant. A couple things stood out, things that we already knew, but to hear it come from the ownership level has significance to it. Just how transformed the building is. Like, these are things that you even sense, like, from my perspective, and I was only around for the tail end of the Garpax era, but you could just sense it being around. I think Michael Reinsdorf used the phrase like drama free, like free of any of, those kind of ancillary things that can, infect the culture or infect the building. Those things are not there. The level to which relationships were emphasized, especially with Zach. Like I've said, injury aside, I've said, plenty of times that Zach really is kind of the protagonist of this season, just in the sense that this front office, getting to know him and getting to see what he was about, led to them having the belief in him to make all the moves that they've made to build around him fast. So he's kind of the reason that this has all come together so quickly for the Bulls. So that was a significant takeaway to me. And, I also, and I think this speaks to Michael Reinsdorf's personality a little bit, like he made sure to clarify, this is not a victory lap. I don't think our job is finished. I don't think, I still think we need to improve. But he's happy where they're at. And I think that's something that gets, and again, you talk about synergy from top to bottom of an organization. You've got Michael Reinsdorf saying that, and you've got Billy, down at the head coaching level saying that on a night-to-night basis during the 9-game winning streak, kind of opining, the team's defensive slippage that is obviously now is coming back to bite them in the butt a little bit. But this is something that's been getting talked about even when things were at their height. So that kind of organizational mentality of, as good as things are, we're not finished. We're not trying to take victory laps right now. That I would say is encouraging to see if I'm a fan reading it. And then, just, national exposure. I mean, the Bulls are back in the spotlight. The Bulls are back relevant. Steve Kerr is getting questions in his pregame last night about, how good is it to see the Bulls, being back to the extent that they are. So, all that stuff is great for the brand, I suppose. I think the NBA would say it's good for the NBA, just having, a major market actually, being relevant. The downside and the caveat is, 2 nationally televised games this week. They didn't live up. They didn't live up to that necessarily, but half a season's still in front. They got to get whole. I definitely thought that interview was significant, and there were a couple interesting nuggets in there from Michael Reinsdorf.
I thought the timing of the interview was just kind of convenient and a little funny. I mean, obviously had nothing to do with the Bears, but just like a few days earlier in the week where like Twitter is blowing up with what the McCaskies said at their presser, and now they're kind of in the same situation the Bulls were a few years back, where people want like a similar type of front office transformation and kind of culture reset and reimagination. So it's still surreal that it happened with the Bulls, and they you definitely have to, as much as we have criticized the Reinsdorfs in the past, you absolutely have to give credit to them this time for what they've been able to do by believing in AK and Eversley, and not being in the way of everything, and actually giving this organization a chance to kind of reset and just do things in a different manner. Like, the team that was built this year is really built unlike any Bulls team that we've seen in the past in terms of like the trades that they've made to really get here. So it's really surreal when you just think about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the lesson, right? Again, as much deserved criticism as that ownership group has gotten, I think the lesson for the Bears is just find someone with a real eye for the sport that your team is in, and hand the keys over. That's kind of the lesson from what the Bulls have done, and what they've done so quickly. I mean, I think any fan would say this, any media member would say this, maybe even people on the Bulls would say it, and Michael Reinsdorf said it. Like, they had confidence that AK was going to turn things around. For it to happen this quickly has even been a surprise to them.
Yeah, right. I think one of my favorite quote that really stood out to me in here, it's one of the first quotes from Michael Reinsdorf. So he says, "When we hired Arturas, I was confident that he would help turn things around, but I can't say I thought it would be this quickly. There are no issues. There's no drama. just everyone wanting to get to the next level. It's a good feeling. And it makes me think about the last like 10 plus years under Gar and Pax. And even when they were trying to get better, there was always drama. There's always infighting or something going on, infighting with players, infighting with coaches, just negative vibes, even when they were winning. And it kind of made me wonder, like, if Michael Reinsdorf was kind of like, Jerry was whatever about it, but you have to wonder if Michael Reinsdorf like took note of that, and he's like, this is a nice change of pace. Like, we're just trying to get better, and no one's fighting. There's no, leaks about this team where so-and-so player is leaking about how their coach, they don't like their head coach, or the head coach is leaking something about the GM that they don't like Mark Eversley or something like that happening, right? It's just pure, we're just trying to get better as an organization from top to bottom.
Hey, and hell, man, I mean, when that Portland job came open, and who knows with Joe Cronin, like maybe that interim thing becomes a full-time thing. He's like making hires in that front office. So I'm not really sure, the full details, what's going on over there. But when Neil O'Shea was first let go, Chris Haynes, one of the first names in terms of like a top candidate that they wanted, and it doesn't speak to, if that's actually going to happen, just one of their top, candidates or preferred options was Mark Eversley. Like, think about that, when I was first coming on your guys' pod 2-3 seasons ago, the Bulls front office would have, poachable candidates, and that they'd be getting that kind of like wide praise and interest. Like that just wasn't a thing that was happening.
100%. But that's pretty much a wrap for today's show. Did you have any final thoughts, Rob, that you wanted to obviously partake on, and then also anything that you have working on right now that readers should be aware of, or listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, final thoughts, just reiterate, we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, big stretch coming up with Memphis, with Cleveland and Milwaukee next week. Bulls got to find a way to right the ship. Casey and I over at NBC Sports Chicago, we've always got a lot of stuff in the works. We're in the weeds every day. So I would just direct people to NBCSportsChicago.com. We've got an app. It's called the My Teams app. You get all our articles in. And the Bulls Talk podcast, Casey and I, and sometimes Jason Goff, Tony Gill. We have guests that'll rotate in occasionally as well, over on the Bulls Talk podcast feed every Tuesday and Friday. Those are my plugs. Tony Gill, if you're listening, I did it. I got Bulls Talk podcast in there. So, but yeah, and just thanks again for having me, guys. It's always fun to chop it up.
Yeah, always great having your insights on the team.
100%. It's a pleasure having you on. You're our go-to Bulls beat reporter. I will always say that. So love having you on. Ed, any final thoughts as we get out of here?
Just hoping for a better week for the team after this one. This was kind of rough, even going back to the Dallas game. So it's just going from winning 9 in a row to losing 3 of the last 4, and then having like injuries on top of that. Just kind of a rough stretch. So hoping for some better stuff next week at least.
Yeah, hopefully they can maybe bounce back today, even with how short they're going to be. Like, I guess maybe Lonzo's not going to play. Maybe I know he's questionable. Maybe he'll play. I don't know. Yeah. But hopefully maybe they can beat a Boston team that has gone through their own struggles. That'd be quite something. Maybe a big negative on Boston that they couldn't beat a really depleted Bulls team. But that would be nice if you can bounce back today, because that Memphis game is not going to be I don't think that's going to be a win.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's a wrap for today's show. Please follow us on @BullsGold. Also, our personal Twitter accounts @Salim_BG Hoops. And then Edward is @EdwardSchuler Jr. If you missed any previous episodes, you can find us under the Barroom Network on all major and minor podcast platforms. Thank you again to Rob Schaefer for joining us, and to the listeners for tuning in. As always, for Edward Schuler and myself, till next time, Bulls fans,